Thanks for coming out. Um, Thank you, David. Thank you, Rob Berg, for the chance to talk and share some of this work I've been doing. Um, so yes, the top five original pinball soundtracks, one musicologist's opinion. Now, you all might remember asking me for my opinion, right? Well, actually, I don't remember that either. But I want it to be more about what I've observed and learned as a scholar of music history, as a musicologist, and a musicologist who is right now trying to write a book about the history of sound and music in pinball machines. And that's what's taken me into this incredible path of learning about all this sound and music that I had no real idea existed before just 3 or 4 years ago. I had begun my career as a musicologist writing about music in film, and then midway through, I started to write about music in early video games. And it was while working on early video game music, I started to realize some of this existed in games, in coin-operated games before video. And once I started to explore what was happening in pinball, it's just been amazing the amount of stuff that I've found so far. I've had a couple things that have come out in print already. Last year, the first essay I wrote, which will be an early chapter in the book, which is from 1871 to 1939, essentially how we get the electric bell. That's the main story that's told there, plus some other sound effects that start to appear. And in a publication that just came out about a month ago is tracing the rise of solid state and what this technological advance allowed to start happening in music, because that's when things start to really get really quite complex and complex pretty quickly. As a musicologist, I've thought about parallels in music history. So the way that in European music history, you start to get more complicated polyphony at the end of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, because they come up with a system of notation that lets the composers put in very precise terms, lets them put down the instructions to singers to how to sing complicated melodic parts that are different melodic parts that might happen at different times. And so that notational system is the technology that allows polyphony to rise and flourish in Europe as it does for several hundred years. And it's really technological advances that are going to allow for similar kinds of sets of instructions in the form of what the chips are going to tell synthesizer chips or samplers to play back. Those instructions, as they start to develop in the solid state games in the late 70s and 80s, that leads to what has become just some really amazing and fantastic original pieces. So what what I've had in mind as I've thought through what I would single out right now, I'm going to offer them in chronological order. I tried to see if I could come up with some way to distinguish. I'm not interested in really trying to do it any finer than these are five scores that I think are really important and innovative in different ways. And these were the four things that were on my mind when I was going through trying to select this sort of desert island set of things I would save. The first was the originality of the music and the ideas in terms of what sort of musical ideas were they trying to express? How did they figure out ways to do that? What kinds of musical innovation is in there? In some cases, these are composers who are creating new sounds, new ways of combining sounds, new things to do with sounds. That sort of innovation really interests me. The question of aesthetics. What do we think is beautiful, or what is pleasant in terms of the sound quality of it? Is it music that we would want to hear and listen to even if we weren't playing the pinball game? Which raises a whole other question that I'm talking about music that is often not at the forefront of anyone's attention. I mean, that's understood going into it. People know that you don't put the quarter in to listen to music usually. You're putting in to play the pinball game and to control the flippers and do stuff with the ball. So that's a given. Um, the last thing is the way that the music, how the um, how the music works with the theme of the game, and 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 so I've selected some here that I think have really deep ties and are really quite smart in the ways that they were blended together. I'll go on and tell you that after I present my 5 examples, I am then going to open it up because I'm much more interested, frankly, in your all's opinion. I hope that maybe the title with opinion in it would be enough. If you had an alternate opinion, that you might want to share it. So I'm keenly interested to hearing what kinds of music and pinball sounds you would replace. Which ones would you take out? What would you keep in of the ones that I'm going to propose? So I'm going chronologically. The first one is Suzanne Ciani's score for Xenon. Oh, and score. So from my music training, I often refer to score. That's, the composer writes a score, the musical score. And when I was talking with Rob Burke about what to title this, I first proposed, well, how about the, top 5 pinball scores? And it was on the phone, but I could see the look of confusion on it. He then said, scores is going to mean something else to this crowd. And he was completely right. So I changed to soundtracks, and that was a fair point. But in the world of music history, where I come from, score is primarily referring to the musical thing the composer has written down or is recorded or something like that. So in the case of Xenon, there's a fair amount of documentation on what Suzanne Ciani did working on it. There's been a lot of attention given to the fact that this was the first time a woman's voice was used in a pinball machine. It is the first, and as far as I know, still the only time a woman has created the sound design for a pinball game. I really hope I'm wrong, and if I could be corrected on that at some point, I would be delighted to do that. Ciani was already a pioneer in working with electronic music, a real pioneer of working with the ARP synthesizer in sound design, created corporate logos and jingles for many things that if you were around in the 70s and 80s, you're probably familiar with her work. I mean, in terms of that stuff, her work has had an incredibly wide reach in terms of the sounds and how we've heard them and might know them. She sampled her own voice, creating ahs. The ahs are in a higher treble range, and the oohs, the oh-ohs, are sort of in a lower range, which is interesting. She recorded call-outs like try tube shot. That's in there. And she also created some stuff that is just musical notes. There are three musical features, really. There's a repeating loop, what I would call an ostinato, a set of 10 notes. They're all equally spaced notes, and this gets constantly faster the longer you keep a ball in play. So the ostinato is the first element. Then there are 2 different arpeggios, chords that are played one note at a time that are triggered by different things. The spinner triggers a B diminished 7th chord. The inlane triggers a C diminished 7th chord. And if you've had some musical theory training and ear training skills, you might know that sound, but maybe on the off chance some of us don't have that. I've got an example of what that arpeggio sounds like. This is not from the game. This was just something I created so we could hear a synthesizer playing the same arpeggio at roughly the tempo it comes in the game. So that's the arpeggio. And I can slow it down. There are all sorts of, there's Sonic Visualizer, which is a free app, which is just incredible. It's really useful. So I've got that arpeggio is recorded in the game, slowed down. So you can also, if you sort of watch from left to right, it'll scroll through. You can follow how that arpeggio goes from the higher notes down to the lowest note and then moves on up like this. So why is that particular diminished 7th harmony noteworthy? I found it noteworthy because it's a harmony that was a popular harmony that pianists and organists who accompanied film in the early part of the 20th century would have used. It's a harmony that lets you modulate to a bunch of different areas. It's a really flexible harmony. And so it was one that was actually advised and taught to people who were trained to play piano and organ for so-called silent film back in the 19 teens and 1920s. And I've got a page here from one of the most well-known manuals for accompanying film, manual published in 1920, where it talks about the importance of using these diminished seventh chords. And she gives us a diminished seventh chord first on the pitch B, and then one on the pitch C, which creates this sense of movement. The B right underneath the C will have a sort of, just to our ear, it'll want to pull up and go to that C. So she's created a kind of tonal coherence to what she's done. And it's also, it's a strategy for approaching how the music will get triggered in the game that in some ways harkens back to the way that early film music was put together. Because when people were accompanying the music as live performers, they had to be able to improvise quickly on the fly. And a pinball game goes even quicker, and the changes happen even more suddenly. So I have no idea if she was at all aware of this. It doesn't really change the fact to me that she's still gone to these same materials that were being used before. So here's I've transcribed the ostinato and the two different arpeggios, and here's a little bit of the gameplay with her score. All right, the next score that I've singled out is Pinball, Chris Granner's breakthrough score for Pinball. Pinball was the second game to use this Yamaha chip that becomes a really famous, important synthesizer chip in the 1980s and 90s. The first game that had that chip had been Road Kings, but Pinball was and Granner scored that one as well, but Pinball is the one where he just really opened things up. I recently found this article from Nudge magazine that says that Angelo was thinking Vangelis at first, and Vangelis would have just been, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years away from the attention that the Oscar for Chariots of Fire would have gotten him. That would have been an interesting thing if Vangelis had scored it, but I think Granner nailed it, and Angelo called him the Mozart of pinball after this. What is really amazing about the Pinball score is how complex it is. So I've been trying to transcribe the scores that I've been listening to and studying, by which I mean I listen to them and I'm trying to notate them out in notation. And I can use something like Sonic Visualizer to slow it down, so that helps a great deal, but I still have to figure out things like, is it in a meter? Does it have a steady pulse? In the case of Pinball, it sometimes sounds like it has multiple steady pulses. And that made it really tricky to kind of figure out. What I did determine is that it begins with this ostinato. There's a very rapid 6-note melody in the upper part that's just doing this. It's just doing this so quickly it doesn't even really sound like a melody. And then as that gets going, other lines of melody happen beneath it, and the sounds change. The timbres go through filters, so some of the sounds, there's a really great complexity to the sounds as they occur. That process of starting with an ostinato and then building melody with it, it reminded me of a piece by George Ligeti, Hungarian composer from 1953, the Musicologist, which had that same process. I'm running a little short on time, so I'm not going to play through this example. I will play some of the first part of the main play music for Pinball, along with my transcription here. once you get if you get multi-ball going, the music becomes much clearer in terms of its metrical organization. It's now in a clear duple meter. There's now just really a single main melody that you hear. It's a kind of musical reward from the I don't know if chaos is the right word, but the sort of the complexity of what was happening before. Everything becomes much clearer if you get the multi-ball music. The next of the five, the third one, is the music that Neil Faulkner wrote for Heavy Metal Meltdown. This may be the one that surprises people. This is not a terribly well-known game. There weren't a whole lot of machines made, but I think it is just a fantastic problem-solving exercise in terms of a way to make a pinball machine do a musical accompaniment to the gameplay that is really thematically so tight. I don't know of any other pinball game that is coordinated what the music is doing with the gameplay. So the conceit of the game is that you're the heavy metal star going out to perform. Every time you start a game, the soundtrack is just drums, a drum start, and then once you shoot the ball and it hits anything, hitting anything on the playfield will trigger different bits of melody. And you'll get this accompanying part with bass and rhythm guitar, but every single target, rollover, saucer will trigger a different little melody, and so you're creating a different guitar solo every time you play the game. And it was advertised in this way. It was about trying to, you're going to go and perform, and the game really follows through on the execution. It's got several different bits of music that will play depending on how deep you get into the game, but I transcribed some of the first one, and I'll play it with this in the background in a second. But I wanted to play just some of these quick riffs as different targets. So these are some of the different little guitar licks that happen whenever you hit different targets. So here's some gameplay. It's got this background that's transcribed on the left side, and those guitar melodies plus several others. It's actually not a game. I'm just pushing stuff with a piece of wood. All right, the fourth that I've got is Black Knight 2000, with some melodic original ideas from Steve Ritchie, and then implemented and put together by Brian Schmidt and Dan Forden. What I find so effective in the main play music here is this harmonic progression. It's a basso ostinato. If I was going to be in a music history class, it's a ground bass. It's a repeating bass line, repeating set of chords, and other things change and build on top of it. And I went through and transcribed it. And I'll just play some of that transcription here. And finally, the last of the scores that I would single out is would be Dave Zabriskie's score for theater of Magic, a game that was originally planned to be the Magic of David Copperfield, and when that fell through, they modified the theme so it was just about a theater of magic in general. But I was intrigued at trying to think of what music for a magic show would be. I had the privilege to speak with Dave Zabriskie last month about this, and he sort of confirmed some of what I had in mind about it. Um, I tracked down some of David Copperfield's different television specials and wanted to find a bit that had some music that I thought was possible inspiration here. I didn't get to ask Zabriskie if this was a particular influence, but the sort of the very mysterious but very active and energetic music that accompanies this escape is what Zabriskie ends up writing as well.
There are 2 minutes and 30 seconds to first finish.
And so finally here I'll play some of what he came up with, which is really based around organ music and this really rapid organ stuff that's happening. Um, there's a repeated part that opens it, but then there's a chromatic part in the middle that is really cool, and the voice leading is superb. I mean, Dave Zabriskie has a doctorate in composition, and he's got this formal training in harmony and voice leading and so forth. And with the occasions where those composers do the games, there really is a difference. It's somebody who is trained in engineering designs better things mechanically than someone who is. It's that sort of a thing. Like once you get a Brian Schmidt or a Chris Granner, or Dave Zabriskie, they're bringing the graduate training in composition into their work for pinball. And I was curious how he recorded this one. He said that he performed all the parts. It was all him entering into a sequencer very slowly, he stressed to me, but it was him entering in all the notes and recording it. And so here's some of that music. And those are the five with the reasons behind. I know there's not a lot of time left, maybe a minute, but if any of you've got complaints, suggestions, additions, subtractions, please.
play that machine, the call outs and everything else, it's really just amazing.
So
You
Discs
know,
of Tron?
Tron
Tron
Legacy
Legacy, rather. Okay.
by Stern 2010, and it draws you into the machine, and it just makes you feel like you're in a different world. No doubt about it.
Oh, thank you.
So
That's great. I mean,
yeah,
I'm sort of working chronologically, and I haven't been a big pinball player until recently, so I don't even know a lot of recent machines. So
score of the year, and when the whole soundtrack is incorporating 100 musicians creating the music, there's probably not another soundtrack out there on any pinball machine that does that.
well,
So
great. That's really helpful.
check
Thank
it
you.
out. It may not be your flavor of music. We all have our different flavor,
Just
but the depth of the music itself is just absolutely
I've been
top-notch.
trying to find an orchestral score that was recorded for pinball, and that's the first one I've heard of so far. So where it was a real orchestra and not sampled instruments. So thank you. I'm grateful. That's one I recently read about that after I'd put this together, and if I'd had more time, I would talk about training in history versus training more as a journalist or a critic. So I'm approaching it from the idea that I'm looking at stuff that's older because I'm trying to get. I mean, it's sort of a cop out and excuse because I just haven't had the time to study everything past 2000 yet. But I've read a lot online and from listened to. I actually considered trying to put it in there, but I didn't have enough time to fit it in. So that that's what I've seen. I've only seen stuff online of gameplay and heard it, but it sounds like it merits being in here too.
I would actually add Twilight Zone and Adams Family scores. I would really love the music to those.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I've had the privilege to talk with Chris Granner about those, and he's not. Those are not the two that he was it Fishtails. He's very proud of. Diner. He's really happy about that music. Um, but those two, I mean, those are a couple that I brought up quickly with him, and he's like, yeah, they're okay, but let's. I mean, I can't speak for him for real, but it was interesting that those were not the ones that jumped out for him.
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened in Gottlieb in the late 80s that gets missed, like TX Sector and some of those games. You just don't see a lot of those games, but those games are all really interesting soundtracks.
And rock versus heavy metal meltdown is a
Yep.
competition there.
TX, 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 TX. You hear that forever, right?
I was wondering, are any of these soundtracks available on a CD or anything like that?
There's a record album with Jackpot has 2 LPs out that have. There's a volume 1 and volume 2. I saw someone selling them in the hall, um, and Theater of Magic is on that. Pinbot's on that. Black Knight 2000's on it. No Heavy Metal Meltdown or Xenon. But there are also some websites. I forget if you poke around. People have what I recently learned how to do too. You can use PinMame to go and pull out the audio files, and people have put those in. I forget the name of the websites. If you email me, I can find it and send it to you. But they're out there.
I was just gonna say Xenon is on Bandcamp, and you can purchase it directly on Bandcamp.
That's direct game clips on Bandcamp.
It's Scotty's actual Bandcamp.
Okay. And I guess to argue for the older side, so you should go back in time. The the Thing by Chicago Coin from 1951 is a very rare example, possibly unique, of a game that is themed from just one pop song, and not like an entire rock opera, but one song, which is the equivalent of making a film about Ode to Billy Joe, which we know is also done. So there's one that the whole reason for the game existing is because of the popular song. Oh,
Sorry, I forgot to say mine. I'm gonna go more old school. I'm gonna say it's 300. Because I like the electromechanical sounds, and if I'm thinking about like what is pinball, like 300 is it to me. Like
What I couldn't hear what game.
bells.
Which game? I couldn't hear the title.
300?
300. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bowling one.
In some of the stuff I've written, I mean, the Gottlieb, the chime bars, the three-tone chime bars that they introduced in 1969 are diminished triad. Everyone I've heard, they're all C sharp, E G, which is strange. I mean, I've speculated a little in some of the stuff I've written about that. It's not there tonally, but it'll always create a different set of pitches and rhythms depending on what happens with the ball. So there's an element of indeterminacy, and I've tried to argue that it's musically similar to some of the things happening with concert hall minimalism, like works by Terry Riley's In C, or things Steve Reich and Philip Glass were doing in the 70s. And it's to me, that's a really fascinating overlap, that pinball is doing some of the same things that concert hall avant-garde composers are doing in a very different context and for very different purposes. But the sounds are pretty similar once you actually start to look at what's in there.
Last call for.
Thank you so much.